Hello, this is Sylvia Syrett with her humble podcast. And I'm interviewing my friend Michael Pockley today. He is, well, you say yourself what you are or who you are.
Um, okay, right. I think Sylvia's interviewing me for the Zen background. So the first answer, of course, is who am I? I don't exist. Um, but technically speaking, I'm a Zen priest. And that's how Sylvia got to know me at first because I set up a meditation group just outside Oxford where we were both living. Um, at present, what am I? Well, I live in Prague. Once you become a Zen priest, I suppose you can't really avoid it. Um, I was a teacher for many, many years, but I'm taking a break. And my main work at the moment is divided at the moment between academic editing for the Czech Academy of Sciences, where I do philosophy and theology, and I paint. And then there's little bits of Zen here and there.
Yeah, so I'm interested in educating people about Zen. Well, Zen has come into my life with you, Michael. Although I had a bit of a glimpse of a Zen-like practice when I was in Germany, which is where I come from. And so it was called contemplation practice. And all we did was sit in a Zen way, trying to think nothing.
But that's well, yeah. But people get very excited about Zen, and you wear special clothes, and people read lots and lots and lots of sutras. But fundamentally, what you were doing was Zen.
Yes, yes. Although I remember it being a Christian practice at the time, and there was a bit of Christian narrative around this, and texts were read from the Bible, and it didn't sit well with me. What I wanted was the non-story and the non-giving me any ideas,
Mm.
which I found in Zen.
Well,
Um,
actually, as it happens, I was introduced to meditation in the first place by somebody who, at the time, was a Christian, um, and I was at school with him at a boarding school, and he noticed that I had some issues, um, and so he introduced me to a couple of, I suppose you could call them meditative practices, visualizations. And it was from there that I got more and more involved in meditation and ended up at Zen. So, although there are Christian meditation practices that are overtly Christian, um, I think that probably actually we are all climbing the same mountain, just from different sides. And if you're a really, really good Christian, not the bullshit kind, but the really good kind, you are identical to a really good Zen Buddhist and a really good Muslim and a really good Hindu and actually a really good humanist.
mm, yeah. Now you've written a book about Zen. What's it called?
So I suppose there's a couple of books that are relevant. One of them is just a simple meditation guide
Hmm.
because Zen and meditation, actually the two words have the same root, and that's How to Meditate on the Train.
Yes. Yeah.
Available in about 9 languages. Um,
Mhm.
and that's just a very short pocket guide with about, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 simple meditation practices for beginners. And then there's another book I did which goes a bit deeper called How to Become a Zen Priest Without Shaving Your Head.
And it has a bit of a picture on it of a guy that you would think comes from, I don't know, a mental facility.
Yeah, it's actually Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I put him there because people get very religious about Zen. The
Mhm.
whole point of Zen is to let go, to take the burdens off your shoulders, to de-stress. And then people get into Zen and get very fixated on this religious thought and that religious thought and this discipline and that discipline, and that they do end up disappearing right up their own bottoms. Um, and although Johnny Rotten was, you know, could not be called a Zen practitioner, his punk ethos was to destroy all the preconceptions that society gives us. And what he wanted to do was to destroy them to arrive at a personal, inner, and actually societal anarchy. And that's not my dream. But the destructive process is actually very, very similar to Zen. You get rid of all these false pictures that have been built up. And you talked about your introduction to meditation with the added Christian bits. And people who are not Christians will think that a lot of the stuff that Christians believe are the added bits that maybe one could do best without. And from the Christian perspective, when you get rid of all that stuff about Sundays and church and judgment, sweep all that aside, from the Christian perspective, what you end up with is love.
Yeah.
And
Is that a sense of love? How would you describe love in that context? What you end up with is with love.
well, I think in any context, if you get rid of the things that really don't matter, from my experience, the only feeling that's left is love.
Yeah.
And
So
I think that, and maybe I'm a bit heretical here, in that a lot of people who do Zen, what they're trying to get is emptiness, whatever the hell that means. But if you're empty, then nature doesn't like a vacuum. And from my experience, the most natural thing to flow in once you're completely empty is love. And I don't want to go off on one of these new age things, because I think a lot of people will use words and then attach meanings to words and then go off in a strange direction. But it just seems that everything, it doesn't seem, I think, if you look at the physics, everything is connected. We're safe with that. Well, that's just a fact. How they're connected, then we have different points of view. But if everything is connected, then the idea that I feel attached to everyone and everything in the universe is just natural. And the fact that I would not feel any selfish preference for my own interests over anything else, again, becomes natural if we're all connected. And if you get rid of this empathy for the rest of the universe, or if you have this empathy for the rest of the universe, and if you get rid of the selfish me preference, the only thing left, really, that feeling, what I've just described, is love.
yeah, yeah, okay. So Zen is a practice, it's a path rather than a religion.
Depends who you're talking to.
I know.
So somewhere in the cupboard, actually, I think it's stored in the cupboard above the cupboard, I have a special Zen suit. And that's definitely a piece of religious clothing. You don't put a special bit of kit on unless you're being religious or doing sport. And so for some people, Zen is religious, and that's not a bad thing if used correctly. So, for example, I've been booked to do some meditation teaching sessions later this summer, and I will probably put the special clothes on for that particular purpose, because when you do that for certain types of people, and I think that they are the type of people who might come to the sessions, they will listen harder if the person appears to speak with the authority of an
Yeah,
ancient religion.
yeah. Authority was coming to my mind as well.
Yeah. So it can be suitable sometimes to treat Zen as a religion, if it's useful. However, there are other times when treating it as a religion is really unhelpful, because what people end up doing is getting off on the smart clothing and the holier than thou, and they end up trying to be humbler than everybody else, and they attach to being more detached than everybody else, and the whole thing starts to be self-defeating.
Yeah, yeah, I've witnessed that actually.
So I think, and that's what I love about Zen. My favorite bit of Zen is the Harp Sutra. It's a very, very short passage. I don't know, about 30 lines. And what it actually says is there is no path. There is no Zen, there is no me, there is no you. All these concepts, we just made them up.
Yeah.
And so the only sensible thing to do is, but my favorite sutra of the Buddha's is where he's asked, do we follow this teaching or that teaching? He says, no. It's very simple. Don't follow any teaching just because the old guys said it, or just because it's traditional, or just because it's holy. Only follow a teaching if you've tried it and you find it helpful.
Yeah.
And so if it's helpful to treat Zen as a religion sometimes, that's the time to treat it as a religion. And if it's helpful just to turn up in your tracky pants, smelling of whiskey, do that. And there will be occasions, you meet some people who relate best to somebody who's informally dressed and smelling of whiskey, and you want to teach them how to meditate. That's how you should turn up.
Mm-hmm.
And you get other people who feel more comfortable with a more formal approach. Fine.
So what I'm hearing is you're tuning into the people you're teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there is no one Zen. Zen itself, really, all it means is, as you said earlier, actually, contemplation. It's meditation.
Yeah.
And
Is it creating higher or deeper or whatever you call it consciousness? Does it fit in with the big consciousness movement? That, for example, I don't know, do you know Russell Brand? He is
is he into that? Oh, far out. Okay.
big
I
guru
just
of
know he was a very,
consciousness.
very rude comedian. Okay.
Oh, he's lovely. He's great. I like him.
um, I, I'd say that Zen's actually the opposite of that. What it's seeking to do is remove consciousness.
Remove consciousness. Now you have to explain that to me. So the aim is to be unconscious, or is that not the opposite of removing consciousness?
Okay, so as I briefly mentioned earlier, one side of my work is as a theologian, and I used to teach theology to children, and they all knew, sooner or later, that I was not a Christian. But mainly, what I taught was Christian theology because I was teaching in England, where that's the traditional religion. And they would say to me, "Well, sir, how can you teach Christianity if actually you're like a Zen priest?" So I said, well, my favorite story from the Bible is the one where Elijah goes up the mountain and he needs to communicate with God because he's got a bit of a problem, like everybody's trying to kill him. And when he's at the top of the mountain, the whole mountain starts shaking. It's really, really powerful force. He thinks, oh, wow, that's God. And he goes out of the cave, but God was not in the earthquake.
Yeah, try not to move your computer
Oh,
because it
sorry,
makes
I've got my
noises.
feet up. Okay. That was just special effects. You're playing extra video.
Thank you.
And then there's this huge tornado comes along, and again it shakes the very rocks, and he goes out, but God's not in the tornado. These huge things of nature, and then the whole mountainside catches fire. You're not just a burning bush; the whole mountainside catches fire. Massive, massive inferno, and he looks, but God's not there. So he goes back into the cave. And then he hears
But
this.
he's in the midst of the inferno. Are you saying that, or is he witnessing that? Because if he was in the
He's
middle
on
of
the mountain, and the whole mountain catches fire. So I guess there must be some magic stopping it quite reaching him. Yeah, it's the Bible. Yeah.
all right.
Anyway, so there's been an earthquake. There's been this huge tornado, this hurricane, and
Yeah.
there's been this massive conflagration. Right. Huge acts of nature, and particularly for a Jewish guy back then, you'd expect that to be where God is. He goes back into the cave, and he hears this very, 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 very gentle whisper. And that's when he covers his face, which is the traditional way of indicating humility before the presence of God. God is in this very gentle whisper. Now,
Mhm.
I used to say to the kids, that actually is him doing Zen. What's he doing in the cave? He's sitting quietly. He's sitting very, very quietly.
Waiting for the inferno to go by.
That's all gone, and the earthquake's gone, and the wind is gone, and he's just sitting very quietly. And if
Yeah.
you sit quietly enough, you will hear a very gentle voice of wisdom. And in different traditions, we call it different things. You know, if you're a Buddhist, it could be enlightenment or Kensho or Satori. If you're a Christian, it's the voice of God.
Hmm.
But it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But to access this, what we need to do is shut up. And
Hmm.
that's where meditation comes in. Now, for a Christian, when they pray, I believe what they're trying to do is quieten down the ego, right? For a Buddhist, and specifically in my training as Zen Buddhist, but you can get this in Sufism in Islam.
Hmm.
Obviously, the Hindus are big on meditation too. It's a question of gently, moment by moment, quietening down the conscious mind. And eventually, if the conscious mind becomes silent, well, firstly, that's when you get your candy as a meditator. It's like, oh, because life is quite stressful, isn't it? And if you get silence, it's like, oh.
Yeah.
And then there's a blank canvas. And that's when, if there's something that your subconscious has been trying to tell you, but you've been swatting it away because you're shouting too loud the whole time. Or if you're a Christian, if there's something that God wants to tell you, but your ego's got in the way, that's when you can hear that very, very quiet voice that Elijah heard, that Buddha heard, that anybody who's ever experienced that little enlightenment moment, whether or not they're religious, it generally comes when the conscious mind has fully quietened down. But that's
Yeah.
why I say that Zen is really a removal of consciousness.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. So that, yeah, words are confusing, aren't they? Because to me that would be higher consciousness. When you follow that whisper all the time, when you are
But you've
always,
got to be very careful, because if you use words like higher and lower, it's very easy then to attach to, oh, better and worse.
yes, yes, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, it's an individual journey, isn't it? It's very individual.
Not
There
only is
is
it,
no,
it is individual, and also it's each um, each part of the journey is an individual journey.
mm,
So what works for me today quite likely won't work for me tomorrow.
hmm,
Or if for some people, it might be appropriate to meditate half an hour a day for 3 or 4 years in a row. And then for those same people, actually, it might be appropriate for them to give it a miss for a year or so and then come back to it.
hmm,
Yeah. So um, I think we need to be very careful not to attach to certain practices, certain things being better or worse per se,
hmm.
but just always remain a little bit flexible.
Well, yeah, I hear that and I agree. Yet when I experience a more quiet mind, and when I follow that, what you call a whisper, well, I like to ask you, is it to me it seems to come as a conversation.
That might be you.
See, that's me. So I have these moments when I'm getting really quiet and I ask questions because I'm inquisitive. And I get answers, and I have then this inside conversation with myself. Is that still my brain? Is that still, I might have never actually heard that whisper. I know I have experienced complete peace and quietness of my mind, but that was drug induced.
Right. I, it's what you're describing is not at all unusual. In fact, it's the standard. Um, And that's where maybe the more rigorously disciplined practice could be useful. Because, so for example, my priest training was done with this awesome guy called Koro Kesan Miles, who's this old guy now with a big white beard. And the core of my training with him was koan practice. So for example, he would ask a question, a traditional question or a modern question. So the first one he asked me was the temple bell echoes across the valley. What is the source of the sound? And obviously I probably pinged back either a rational answer or the answer I felt was the least rational, because I knew that you weren't supposed to be rational. But what was happening was that I was having a conversation. I was using my conscious mind.
Yeah.
And he very politely but firmly gave me a Buddhist version of bullshit.
Well, I would like. Okay, never mind.
Yeah,
Go
it's another way of saying to your conscious mind, just shut up, Michael. Shut your mind and go and try again. And
Don't
so,
be clever. Is it like, don't be clever? Try
yeah,
not to work this out.
exactly. Don't be clever. Try not to work it out, and don't argue. And he wasn't saying don't argue with me, although that's part of the deal if you have a Zen teacher.
Yeah.
He was saying don't argue with yourself. Just go and sit again, because whatever answer you've just given, if you look at it for long enough, the husk of it will probably peel away and you'll get something a bit clearer. Whereas if you start arguing with it, you'll probably end up just kicking the grain off the table and having to start again. So you look at it very passively, get even quieter, but with your answer there present. And it may be that by chance you've chosen the right answer and nothing will change.
And as I understand, there is no right answer.
Correct. Or rather, there is not a right answer. You can't put it in a book. I mean, people have put them in books, which is quite ironic. But no, for each person, there's a different answer. And for each person, upon each occasion, there's probably a different answer.
Which makes me think, how can the teacher know that this was not coming from complete presence, complete stillness?
Right. And that's why if you're going to do this, it's a real teamwork thing. You've got to really get to know your teacher.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember that you threw into one of the Zen sessions I did with you. You mentioned the very famous question, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" And
Easy. Bart Simpson.
like that, it was, the listeners won't have seen this. So what he did is, how would you describe what you just did? Is you're flapping your fingers against your palm.
I don't know where the microphone is on my computer.
Okay, so see, but that was an interesting practice for me, because you didn't give me that as a practice, because I was never wanting to become a Zen priest. But it did. This question lingered in me a long time. And one night, sitting in the hot tub with my husband and feeling complete quietness and probably having a bit of some intake of some certain medicine, um, I the answer that came to me was silence.
Ah, yeah.
So I felt this was the answer. It was a feeling, not a
Yeah.
mental.
And that's, yeah. And if it feels, that's probably
It
you arriving at the
felt,
right place for you
yeah,
on that day. But if you did the same meditation today, you might get that same, yeah, that's right, feeling from a completely different answer.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I get that. Yeah, so that's the contemplation bit. The contemplation is, you sit with a question, or a statement, I guess, and you allow yourself not to think about what the right answer is. You just sort of sit with it and leave it. So how I'm thinking about it is I hold it in the
It's in the
back of
back of
my
your head. Yeah, yeah.
mind.
Because the subconscious is such a large proportion of the thinking mind.
Yeah,
It seems a bit of a waste, the fact that we use it so rarely.
yeah, yeah. When I do my constellation, my family constellation work, I always get the impression, probably the wrong word, but I get a sense of being a channel,
Mm.
because not only do I have my facilitator hat on, but also I seem to be able to drop into a non-thinking and just observing state of being.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And when I facilitate, often sentences or words come to me that I don't know where they come from, and I voice them. I usually say something along the lines of, I don't know where this is coming from, but I'm saying it anyway, and you tell me whether it's right or wrong or feels right or wrong. And I'm saying it. And it very often, quite often, it's right. It feels right for the whole room.
Yeah.
There's a sense of wow and goosebumps. Um, so for me, my family constellation practice is my way of dropping into that state of that I call silence.
And that's, I think, a key point, that if that's what works for you, that's what you should do.
Mm.
And I referred earlier to a sutra in which Buddha said, don't adopt a particular teaching. It's the Kalama Sutta. Don't adopt a particular teaching just because I said so, whatever. The broader context of that was that he was visiting a village, and they were at the time financially supporting the Jain community.
The what?
Various Jains. It's the people who don't shave their heads but pluck the hairs out.
Oh,
Hardcore vegans. Their monks will always have a broom to sweep the bugs from in front of them as they walk.
yeah,
So the movement grew up basically at the same time as Buddhism. And the people in the village were supporting Mahavira, the Jain teacher. And they said, look, should we continue doing this? Because we're thinking of changing our support from him to you. And that's when Buddha said, no. Carry on supporting this guy. He's good too. Yeah.
yeah.
If it
Okay,
works for you, do it.
I
Whatever
get, I
works
get
for you,
it.
do
Yeah,
it.
whatever works for you, basically. If you need to go running, yeah,
Mm.
and you empty your mind by running, go running.
Yeah, if it gets you to the same place, I mean, some practices like, I don't know, Satanism probably take you somewhere else.
Gosh, never thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but if it
But
but
it
if it
has a
gets
lot of content, you see. That's the thing. When you follow narratives, then that's where you fill your mind, I feel.
yeah, um, but that said, there can be stories with narratives like Christianity, and if you don't over attach to the narrative, you can arrive at the same place. It's a question of how you do it, I suppose. Although with Satanism, I suspect there might be issues arising.
Well, yeah. So I have another question. So you did mention God,
Hmm.
and for some people, you mentioning God means, oh, he has an idea about God, and that's interesting. I want to know more about that. And for some people, it's very off-putting.
Hmm.
So I
Um,
wonder how you see just the word.
yeah. Um, well, there is a concept of God that you'll get from certain religious groups. So, the Christians will have a sort of a predefined package of God, and they will vary to greater or lesser extents, but they'll basically have that package. And I don't believe in that package, no. Um, I'm unwilling to rule out the existence of God simply because that would be an act of faith, because you can't prove a negative.
Yeah.
And I'm not a person of any faith whatsoever.
Yeah.
So if somebody were to prove to me that God exists, great. If somebody could prove to me God doesn't exist, great. But so far, I've not seen any reasonable proof of either side. So
All right. So when you said earlier that you experience, did you say that? I'm not sure. Did you say?
okay, yeah. So I was talking about Elijah and his experience of God. I understand
Yes.
what you mean. So different people will have different ways of expressing the most profound truths of the universe. And for some people, they will have this very extended metaphor that they will call God.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, for a lot of them, it's not a metaphor, it's actually a real being.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at religions and their use of the word God, I'm understanding it myself as a metaphor for what those people believe. But
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
for themselves, no, it's real.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm probably a little bit slack about my use of the word God, because I know what I'm thinking, other people don't.
Mm.
But no, I'm not subscribing to anything
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I am ruling out some of the stuff that seems a little bit unlikely.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah. So I've recently had this. I don't know. I sort of it's it's not only something that is being uh, mentioned by what I call highly aware or conscious or awakened people, people who are practicing silence, if you like, or practicing anything that takes you to silence, more like.
Mhm.
Um, and also in my own contemplation, I feel sometimes that we are individual people, but maybe we are not so individual as we think we
Yeah.
are.
Mm.
Uh, we might just be, so there's people who say, when I look at you, I see myself.
Mm.
And then it's about managing my own reaction or response. And
Mm.
that this is how I will know myself. And that's the only way to know myself.
So there's an early um, Buddhist philosopher called Nagarjuna, not to be confused with the Bollywood actor, um, and he looked at views like this about, is there a God or whatever, do I exist or not, and he encapsulated a view which became central to later development of Buddhism, such as Zen, which is that um, there is not me, and we can know this because, for example, not one single atom of my body was in my body 2 years ago. Even the
Mm,
calcium in the bones, like, whoa, yeah. Well, actually, some of them were there, but only because they've gone out and come back.
yeah.
So, as far as that's concerned, there will be elements of me, not literally speaking, that are now part of you, or whoever's watching this podcast, and elements of you and them that are part of me. So it's artificial to say that there's me, because even on a
Mm,
physical basis, we keep exchanging. But at the same time, it's inaccurate to say that you and I are the same.
mm.
Apart from the obvious point that you're one end of this podcast and I'm the other. Yeah, we're not even in the same country. Greetings from Prague. Um, and so Nagarjuna said, well, yeah, there is not Sylvia. Okay, Sylvia does not really exist as an individual unit.
Mm,
Okay, but also it's artificial to say that Sylvia does not exist, because clearly she does.
mm,
And we have to just adapt the idea and it's a bit of a stretch for the human brain, that it's simply how you're looking at it. So when I'm at the airport, it's very reasonable for the gentleman at the booth to look at my passport and consider me to be an individual, right? But when we're looking at this, let's say chemically, it's equally reasonable to say, well, I'm just this temporary thing that keeps changing.
Yeah.
And so it's inaccurate to say that I was the same person that I was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you get these feelings of you and I, maybe we're one, maybe we're not, it's possibly just, well, today I'm looking at it from this direction. So I'm feeling that we are one person, but tomorrow I'll be looking at it from that perspective, and then I'll be looking again.
Well, I'm thinking of it in the way that we're all islands, and there's a lot of water, and we're sticking out of the water, but underneath we're all connected.
Like it. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Yeah. I'm glad we agree on that one. I think that's a good place to stop and not bore people too much. It's not boring at all to me, but and I could talk about this forever with you. Yeah, I would like to say that you have become a friend, but you used to be my teacher, and I still see you as my teacher now. When I'm in a state of mind that I can't bear myself with myself, then you are my go-to person. Um, and I would like to ask Michael, is there anything you're offering to the world apart from your beautiful books and your beautiful paintings?
Well, anybody who ever wants to learn meditation, I teach meditation. Um, Anybody who needs to talk anything through, they can get in touch with me, well, either via you or I don't know. You can give them a link to my website or something. My email address is
Yeah,
there.
I will put your website link underneath the
Brilliant.
video.
Yeah. So anybody who wants to get in touch about, well, anything really, great.
Yeah, yeah, okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, it's lovely talking.
I do the namaste.
Particularly it's COVID times, all this elbow bumping. Why? In India they got this perfectly nice gesture
We
which
have
doesn't
this
require to
beautiful
touch anyone.
namaste. Yes, indeed. Which is, I think, it means I see you, or something like, or I honor you, or I honor the god or goddess in you, something like that.
All of those work for me.
Yeah, me too. Okay, thank you. Bye
Pleasure.
bye.
Bye bye.